Hey everybody, it's Mike here from The Art of Guitar. I'm back with another concert review video, and this one is for Sir Paul McCartney. I gotta remember to say Sir at least once today. And it was at US Bank Stadium, and that was on October 17th. It was a Friday night, great night for a concert. And it's one that I won't ever forget for a couple of reasons that I'll talk about. To say that I was waiting my entire life for this concert, though, would be a bit of an exaggeration, because I actually didn't get into the Beatles till about my mid-20s. I was kind of late to the party. You know, when I first started playing guitar around age 12 and 13, people would tell me all the time that I had to get into the Beatles. So it was sort of easy at that age to rebel against what most people are telling you. You know, if everyone and their mother's telling you that you have to get into something, I was just like, no thanks. But in the end, they were right, of course. So I guess you could say your mother should know. Oh. I'm sorry, I've got a lot of Beatles puns for you today. So after I got the tickets, the excitement for the concert was really building, but it was derailed in a big way when I found out that Ace Frehley passed away the day before. So I was just like, you know what? It's going to be weird to go to a concert and have a great time, but sometimes you need a little relief from some bad, news. And so also my nephew was flying in from New Mexico. So I thought, whatever, we got to push through this weekend. Let's have a good time as much as we can. Showtime was at 8 o'clock, and people were telling me that Paul was playing 3 hours without an opening act. And if you think about that, that would be hard to do pretty much for anybody. You know, I've been on stage many times for 3 hours, and by the end, my feet are killing me. The next day, I'm just like, oh, I feel old. And here he is doing it on tour for, I believe, around 20 dates or so. That's pretty impressive. So we parked, and as we walked out of the parking garage, we came up and we could see it right in front of us, this awesome site called US Bank Stadium. My nephew and I actually went there last year for Metallica, and I kept thinking, man, I'm really spoiling my nephew, because last year was Metallica. We were in the pit area. Now Paul McCartney, we're on the floor area. You know, I'm going to run out of legends to take him to, so enjoy this one. But we're in line for a while. We finally get inside the building. We had to go through the security metal detectors. The lady zapping the tickets looked at the people in front of us and shook her head, and she's like, no, you guys have to go back outside and all the way around the building because you guys have different tickets. And those guys look so bummed out, and they're just like, ah, oh, damn it. And they walked out, and I was like, sucks to be you guys, sorry. And then we go up, she scans our tickets and shakes her head at us too. And she's like, no, you guys have floor seats. You have to go all the way around the building. Go back outside and do this all over again. So we go back outside, and a huge group of us were just kind of like, what is going on? We eventually found where we were supposed to be, and there was this mass of people all waiting to get through the metal detectors again, these other ones, and then have their tickets scanned and go in so they can get their floor seats. Well, by now it's 7:45, and we stood there, and the line did not budge. I swear it was the worst line ever because there were so many people and there were only so many metal detectors. And we looked up and people were just barely trickling through them. Well, I could feel the energy of the whole group losing patience because next thing you knew, it was 7:50, 7:55, and it said concert was starting at 8 o'clock. And lately concerts have been very punctual. So I thought, man, we're not even halfway through this line and it's 7:55. There's no way we're going to make it in time. People started yelling out at the security, like, what's taking so long? And this group of people that were really mad, they just moved to the side and tried to kind of bull rush their way through it. They got busted and had to go all the way to the back of the line. It was so sad. Well, not really. I just couldn't believe that a place like US Bank Stadium, who's housed huge concerts, like I said, Metallica, they had Taylor Swift, they just seemed like they didn't have it together this night. Anytime someone tried to question one of the employees, they were just like, I don't know what's going on, and they would just keep walking. By the time we got to the front, through the doors, it was 8:15, and there was still a ton of people behind us. So I was just like baffled. I was thinking they're going to get a lot of angry calls the next day. By the way, on Google, it claims that there was a no phone policy, and that's what was taking so long, but I am here to tell you that that was not the case. Nobody took my phone, obviously I have the footage from the show, and nobody was asking for phones, none of that stuff. So don't believe that. Don't believe the hype. We finally got in. We found where we had to go down because we had the floor tickets, like I said, and you have to go down like 100 stairs to get to the floor. And as we were descending the stairs, Paul came out and they kicked in to help. So I think the band started later because they heard the news that there was such a, cluster going on outside. And so that was cool that they at least tried to start a little bit late, but I knew he was going to play for 3 hours. So I thought, man, they can't wait forever. They don't have clearly defined markings on the rows. They have these little paper tags. And so we had to go up with our phone and try to see what it was. I'm telling you, US Bank Stadium, get it together when it comes to concerts. For football games, it's awesome. But for concerts, that's a little bit dodgy. Sorry, I've been reading Ozzy's autobiography, so dodgy is now in my vernacular. So it was dodgy as hell. We were 15 rows back from the stage, and the floor area isn't all it's cracked up to be. It sounds awesome. If you've been on the floor before, it's great to be really close to the action most of the time. But it's also just so crazy down there sometimes. Finding your seat, everybody's squished together like sardines. And, I had to stand kind of sideways in order to fit in the aisle just because of the way they have the seats. And of course, I had to stand next to the guy who does this the whole concert and doesn't move a bit for you. Most people would be like, hey, cool, and kind of move a little bit so to make space for you. But he was just like, nope, this is what I'm doing all night. During the song Coming Up, though, they kicked into the Peter Gunn theme, which I thought was really cool. Then they kicked into Gotta Get You Into My Life, and that's when I finally felt like I was settled into the concert. I could finally take a breath after all that craziness outside, and I started to really take in the stage, the music, the atmosphere, the show. What I really loved about the stage layout is it was actually pretty basic, except they had a ton of amps right out in front. I love tube amps, and it was really cool to see all of them on display. Of course, Paul was in the middle, and then he was surrounded by his musicians. On his right, he had Rusty Anderson, excellent guitar player. On his left, he had Brian Ray, who also plays bass, so he could switch off, because Paul plays basically everything. On the keys, you had Wix Wickens. I love that name. And he held down the keys the whole night. He had his whole station set up. Next to him, he had the Hot City Horns, which are 3-horn players who are just awesome, and they're very animated. I'd say out of all 3 of them, 2 of them were the most into it. They had kind of like jazz hands energy. One of the guys, though, he looked like he was going through the motions because he had to, but he was not thrilled about it. But all 3 of them as a unit were just insanely awesome. On drums, you have the great Abe Laboriel Jr. And he was one of those guys that brought a little comic relief to the stage. On the other corner, you had Paul's piano set up. So that was kind of exciting because, like I said, Paul plays all the different instruments during the show, and some that surprised me, actually, I'll talk about in a little bit. Paul kept doing this thing that I really liked. He would go out in front and smile and just sort of take in the moment. And it gave a chance, for the crowd to cheer him on, obviously. But you could tell he wasn't trying for that. He wasn't doing too much Hulk Hogan stuff, He was more just like kind of, like I said, taking it all in. And for a guy who spent his whole life in front of huge crowds, that's really cool to see that he's not, jaded. He's not like, whatever, this is just old hat for me. He was actually in the moment and loving it. Or he was thinking, look how much money I made tonight. No, I'm just kidding. Like usual, I did not cheat and look at his previous show's set list, even though a lot of people like to do that. I really wanted to be surprised. Plus, Paul has such a catalog of songs that he could choose from that, now I should look and see what he's played at other shows. Maybe he changes it up a lot. Of course, he has his staples, but he threw in a lot of tunes that I really didn't know. I'm kind of a Paul poser when it comes to Paul outside of the Beatles. I have to admit that. And of course, every time he kicked into a Beatles tune, I got that rush of excitement inside. And he kicked into Drive My Car, which, by the way, has one of the most confusing intros. If you've ever tried to count it correctly, it is not easy. So I was kind of studying how they were doing it, and I'm like, okay, good, because I made a video about it. And I'm like, okay, I was right. Thank God. 2, 3, 4. I did read a couple reviews the day after the concert, and a lot of people were kind of ragging on Paul's voice. And, whenever he would talk to the crowd, he had a bit of a raspy thing happening. And I thought, well, he's 82. He's on tour playing 3-hour shows, like I said. So you got to give him some leeway when it comes to that. And I kept waiting for it to really stand out in the music. My voice just kind of went weird there. But it wasn't really obvious until he sang Maybe I'm Amazed, just because it's him on the piano and there's a lot of space to hear his vocals clearly. It was kind of cool because throughout the night, somebody else in the band would sing along on some of the high parts, and that's a really cool way to get through a show if you're having any difficulties. He would still go for it. And what was cool about his range was sometimes in the middle he would have issues, But then when it came to the high stuff, he sounded great. Plus, like I say in all my videos, live, you don't really notice that as much. On playback, yes, like the next day, you're going to be like, oh, it sounded a little bit harsh. But when you're there and the lights are going and the crowd's excited, you don't really care as much about him not hitting every note perfect, you know? Now, I'm not going to talk about every song in order of what he played, but, you know, I'm going to skip around a little bit, but you could check that out on Setlist FM, which, by the way, they don't sponsor me or anything like that, but I always use their site every time I go to a concert and do a review because I'm like, I forgot what they played next. So thanks, Setlist FM. You could send me a check if you want to, though. They played Getting Better, and I just love the bounce of that song. The whole crowd, you could just see them all bouncing their heads together. The lighting for the show was done so well. So they had all the screens, the main screen, and then the two, one on each side. But the lighting rig was so tastefully done and so artistic. He had those lasers that I love, the ones that point out and then spread out. Whoever Paul McCartney has designing these scenes did such a great job. They just have such an artistic eye because everything matched in a really cool way. Things stood out when they needed to, but it was also subtle when it had to be. And I hadn't even seen the craziest part yet, so that's coming up. When they kicked into Let Me Roll It, at first I forgot about that tune until I heard that nasty guitar lick. It's one of the dirtiest, grittiest, nastiest guitar licks of all time, and it just keeps repeating through the whole song. So far Paul played bass, he played the piano, and now he's playing electric guitar. I was half waiting for him to jump on the drum kit. That would be so cool. He could, you know, he's played drums on a lot of his tracks, but he didn't do that. He played a song called My Valentine, which I didn't know, and he dedicated it to his wife, and he pointed to the kind of in the crowd, like on the floor area, and said, she's right there in the crowd. And I kept thinking, is that true? Like, I can't imagine Paul McCartney's wife in with us people in the crowd and not have to be surrounded by a ton of bodyguards. So I don't know what that was all about. And we found out later that Pete Davidson was there. And I guess he surprised his fiance or wife or somebody. I don't know. I don't keep track. But they were there for a little while and then they left before the end of the show. So that was a cool tidbit. My nephew's the one who recognized him. He's like, oh, Pete Davidson was here. He just walked by. The crowd was having a lot of fun too. There were a lot of goofy signs that people were holding up. One of them said, sign my butt. And Paul said, yeah, see me after the show. After seeing so many concerts in my life, it was actually fun to watch the concert kind of through my nephew's eyes. He's not as big a fan of Paul McCartney as I am, but just to watch him experience it was really cool. And when the band kicked into Love Me Do, I just kept thinking, do you realize what you're seeing right now live? But I also had to ask myself that question. Do I realize what I'm seeing in front of me? Paul McCartney singing Love Me Do. This is wild. And it was great how he would put footage up on the screen of the other band members, so it did feel like he was paying tribute, you know, to the rest of the band. By the way, when they played Love Me Do, they scaled down the stage. This is when the lighting got a little bit more subtle, if you will, and suddenly Abe was playing on this little stand-up kit, and you know, it was more of a rootsy sort of feel, which was really cool. I kept thinking, would Ringo have stood up and played? That would have been crazy. I could see him just like running around and being wild if he wasn't sitting down. So maybe it's a good idea that he had a chair. Speaking of Abe the drummer, during the song Dance Tonight, he went into this crazy routine of dance moves. And I think he covered all of them. I swear I saw the Macarena in there. I saw the Sprinkler. I saw, you know, the Running Man. I don't know all the dances. But he did. It was awesome because it added that comic relief to the show. Now Paul was playing the mandolin. Like I said, he just kept switching instruments all night. Now the magnitude of the night didn't really hit me until he kicked into Blackbird, because it was just him solo with an acoustic guitar, and he stood on this platform. And as he kicked into the tune, it started to rise up. It was like a Taylor Swift effect or something. And there were these star effects everywhere, and I just kept thinking, we're watching Paul McCartney play Blackbird. I looked over to my nephew because I know he plays that song live whenever he does his acoustic shows. And, you know, I was like, isn't this awesome? And he's like, I'm just watching his hands to make sure I play it right. I was like, that's such a musician thing to say. You know, I'm loving the concert, but I really have to see if I'm screwing this Blackbird riff up. Then he surprised everybody by playing the song called Now and Then, which came out, I believe, in 2023. And just like in the anthology series where they released like a new unheard song from demos, first one was Free as a Bird, the next one was Real Love. I almost said True Love. Real Love is actually one of my favorite Beatles tunes. When I first heard it, I'm like, this is new? This is like timeless sounding already. So if you haven't heard Real Love, check that one out. The song Now and Then is still pretty new to me, so it's still kind of growing on me, but man, Free as a Bird and Real Love are just next level. I was getting pretty thirsty at this point, so I went back to get a drink, and it was kind of nice to get away away from all the craziness of the crowd on the floor. And I went back and the whole back area was kind of open, so it felt really cool. But in order to get a drink that I usually get, a double whiskey on the rocks, I had to go upstairs. So I had to go back up the 100 stairs. They made me definitely work for this. Got to the top and I felt like my legs were just wobbly, like I just did 20 squats. I'm like, man, I really got to get back in shape. This is so pathetic. While I was out, I heard him kicking into Lady Madonna. And I just kept thinking, man, I really got to get back to my seat. Get back. Don't worry, I have one more before the night's over. I got back to my seat just in time to hear the song Jet, which I believe is one of those songs that were written for live playing. Like it was just written to be played in front of an audience. There's an energy to that song, you know, when the whole crowd's yelling Jet back to Paul, that I love. And I used to see it in videos all the time. And I was like, I'm actually here doing it. Then they kick into a tune that I was not expecting. A song off Sgt. Pepper. By the way, I never call it Sgt. Pepper's, like a lot of people. That sounds weird to me, but off Sgt. Pepper, called Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. It's probably the last song I expected to hear, a Beatles song at least, at this show. And it's kind of the opposite of Jet to me. It's almost like a song that's not supposed to be live, but they did such a great job with it. And the whole time I'm just like, this is so bizarre. The visuals, though, made it so incredible. I kept thinking, man, if I was chemically impaired off more than just whiskey right now, this would be sick. Now, even though there were a ton of songs being played, it flew by so fast. Next thing I know, I look up and Paul has a ukulele in his hands. I thought, okay, this might be a good time to run to the bathroom really quick. Plus, I was kind of liking the back area because it was less congested and everybody was kind of having fun back there too. It was like a separate party. You had people dancing. Everybody seemed like they were just free and had a great time. Well, I kind of miscalculated the bathroom trip because Paul ended up kicking into the song Something, which is one of my favorite Beatles tunes, one of my favorite George Harrison tunes. The crowd really started to go crazy during Obla Di Obla Da, Oobla Da. I can never say that right. And Band on the Run. Now that song, I believe, is great either just listening in your room or live. Band on the Run, it's such a flexible tune in that aspect. I actually found myself going, how's he gonna top that song? And I kept asking that throughout the night, and then he would top it. So all of a sudden it kicks in to Get Back. I'm like, oh yeah, that one. During that tune, they played a lot of footage that you could see on the documentary Get Back, which I highly recommend. I did a whole video on that, by the way. And that was cool to see them in the studio and then hearing the song live as well. In the documentary, by the way, you can actually watch Paul McCartney come up with the idea for Get Back. And then the perfect tune to follow that with was Let It Be. You know, Paul's back at the piano and the camera angle they have on him on the screen is the same that they had for the video. And so it was really cool to think of him back when he was super young and now seeing him as an 82-year-old still doing it. I kept telling my nephew that the song I was really waiting for was Live and Let Die. And it did not disappoint when they kicked into that because, man, I thought the lights were cool up into that point, and all of a sudden this happens. I turned around and the lady behind me, who was really short, I felt bad once again at concerts when I'm like taller and the person behind me can't see anything. But I turned around and she looked so excited. I almost like wanted to high five her. I can't explain it, but I was in the moment. You know, Paul McCartney's playing Live and Let Die, and this lady just looked so excited. I thought a high five was in order, but luckily I held back. That might have weirded her out for me to just be like, it's not too often that I get caught off guard at a concert. You know, usually I kind of know what I'm in for. And, you know, if you go see Kiss, you're ready for that at any second. But during Paul McCartney, to have it kind of chill most of the show and then bam, these fireworks go off, I just jumped a little bit. After that, they calmed it down a bit and played Hey Jude. And of course, it has that epic ending where everybody sings, you know, the na-na-na part forever. And I turn around and this guy's holding this sign. I thought it was very appropriate. It's funny because if Paul ever wanted to stretch a show, let's say he didn't want to play as many songs, he could have done the na-na-na part for 20 minutes. Maybe he actually did. I don't remember. After that, the band came out, did like a bow and walked off. And I thought that has to be the end. That was like 30 tunes right there. But I was wrong. They played I've Got a Feeling, and they did this really cool thing where they had John Lennon singing, just like in the recording, and now they showed a visual of him, so it kind of felt like he was actually going back and forth with him. It was great. When they kicked into Sgt. Pepper Reprise, I was like, how much can I take? This is like auditory and visual stimulation to the max. I mean, we just sat through Something, Obladi, Band on the Run, Let It Be, Get Back, Live and Let Die, Hey Jude, I've Got a Feeling. It was just like, I'm numb at this point. I had to laugh when they kicked into Helter Skelter because my nephew was actually like, oh, he plays this tune? I was like, yeah, actually it's on the White Album from 1968, and I would say it should be in the running for a song that kind of invented heavy metal. I know that title goes to Black Sabbath, but man, if you listen to 68 White Album and you hear Helter Skelter, Imagine the Times, that seems like heavy metal to me. I had this bright idea to beat the crowd, so I thought, you know what we could do? Since it's all congested up here anyway, let's climb the 100 stairs back up. By the way, I got all my steps in that day. And let's stand up in this balcony area, because I kind of did that when I first went upstairs and nobody balked at it. Everybody was cool with it. So we did that. We stood at the top. I thought we could at least avoid standing on those stairs all night when everyone's trying to leave. I hate to be that old guy that wants to get out early, but sometimes I become that. So we stood up there for the last few tunes, and it was really cool to see the whole thing from far back and up, because now we had a whole view of the entire setup. At the end, Paul let off all this smoke and confetti, and it was just such a cool way to finish up the show. And he actually said, we'll see you next time. So at 82 years old, he shows no signs of slowing down. I don't want to jinx him, but I can see Paul playing all the way into his 90s. That'd be so cool. It'll be Paul and the Rolling Stones on tour together. The geriatric tour. I don't know. And by the way, I did end up getting a t-shirt. It's kind of a tradition at every show now, so check it out. Sir Paul McCartney. A lot more colorful than most of my shirts. So my plan paid off. We got out to the truck and we beat the crowd. We were out of there in like 10 minutes. It was crazy. I always think back to the Metallica GNR show where we went outside and it was pouring out and we were basically waiting in traffic for an hour and a half or something. That show I will never forget because of a lot of things, but that was a big part of it. So in the end, it was an unforgettable concert. And like I said, it was a bit of a respite from the Ace Frehley news. And it was really cool to watch my nephew experience that. And I've got a feeling he's going to remember it for the rest of his life. Or at least he could say, you know, I've seen a Beatle live in the flesh. Next on the bucket list is to see Ringo Starr in his all-star band. That would be so cool. So if he ever comes to Minnesota or nearby Minnesota, I want to go to that. So anyway, thank you everyone for watching this. These are always fun to do. Hopefully people that aren't able to go to the shows can experience it a little bit through my videos and maybe feel a little bit like they were there too. So that's my goal. Okay, everyone, thank you for watching. We'll catch you later. Bye-bye.